In this lecture and the next one, we're going to talk about function parameters. So let's start with rest parameters right in this lecture. So, rest parameters allow us to pass an arbitrary number of arguments into a function and use these arguments in that function. So in the last lecture, we've been looking at the spread operator, right? Now, rest parameters look exactly the same, but they are very different. So they use the same notation with the 3 dots, but actually rest parameters are the exact opposite of the spread operator. And that's because the spread operator takes an array and basically transforms it into single values, while the rest parameters receive a couple of single values and transforms them into an array when we call a function with multiple parameters. Okay, but enough talking, let's now see a practical example of this. So suppose we want to create a function that receives an arbitrary number of years and then prints to the console whether each person corresponding to these years is of full age or not. And once more, I'm going to start by doing it the ES5 way and then show you how the rest parameters work in ES6, making our life a bit easier. So in ES5, let's create a function called isFullAge and then 5. Okay, and in ES5, if we want to receive an undefined number of arguments, then we simply don't define any parameters for a function and then just use the arguments keyword. And remember, the arguments keyword or variable is very similar to the this variable, and it's a variable that each execution context gets access to. So let's first of all log this arguments variable to the console to see what it looks like. And arguments. Okay, so again, just like this is a special variable that we have access to in all functions. So let's say we want to call this function with 3 years, like 1990, 1999, and 1965. So let's see what happens now in the console. And now we have a small error here, but that's simply because I forgot the 5 here. Okay, so again, and so this is the arguments variable. And we see that it actually looks a bit similar to an array, but in fact it is not an array. So it simply says object here and not array, right? So all of the arrays have the array function constructor as their prototype, which is not the case here. And so arguments is not an array. We say that it's an array-like structure, but it's not really an array. So if we want to use it as an array, for example, to loop through it, then we need to first transform it to an array. And we already know how to do that with our little hack, right? And so we say var args array should be array.prototype.slice and then call it with the arguments. Right? So that's what we did a couple lectures earlier. So now we're ready to loop through this array. And remember, what we want to do here is to calculate if each person is of full age. So it's very simple. We of course need to create a callback function here, and we use current, and we want to log to the console. So 2016, or the current year, minus the current value is greater or equal than 18. And that's it. So remember, the current is of course the current element of the array, and the array comes from the arguments. So all of these numbers that we pass into the function, which are, in this case, our years. So with this, it's actually going to work already. So let's check, and yeah, so it does work. So we have true, false, true. So the first person is of full age, This one born in 1999 is not, and this one is of full age too. So let's try it with a different number of arguments. So I'm gonna add 2 more years here, let's say 2016 and 1987. And let's check it again. And so these are the first 3 coming from this function call, and these 5 here come of course from these. So we have true, false, true again, and then false, true. So this person of course is not of full age, and this one is. And if we wanted to add 100 arguments here, then it would work with 100 arguments of course. So this is how we do it in ES5. But let's now take a look at rest parameters in ES6. So ES6. And we're going to write a similar function, but make use of rest parameters. So is full age 6. And now, instead of not having any arguments, we use the rest parameter operator. And as I mentioned before, it's the exact same as the spread operator. So again, we have the 3 dots. And then we say the name of the variable. And so what this is going to do is, as soon as we call the function, it will transform the arguments, for example, these 3 arguments or these 5, it will transform them into an array and then pass it into this function. And we can then access that years array automatically in a function and use it as we did before. So let's do that now. So let me first do exactly the same that we did before. So I'm going to call a function, and I'll show you what the years looks like. Let's just deactivate this function call here and take a look at this. All right, so this is years, and now we see that this is actually an array. So that is very handy, because now we don't have to do all of this, so we don't have to transform anything into an array because we already have the array. So now all we have to do is to do that console log that we did before. So we can say years for each, and here again we're going to use the arrow function and say that we want 2016 minus the current year and check if it's greater or equal to 18. And here we go. So this is the same function as before, but making use of rest parameters, which makes our code shorter and easier to read. And just to make sure that it works, okay, nothing happened. And that's of course because I forgot to write the console log here. So console.log of course, and now it's gonna work. So close it here, and all right. So true, false, true. And if we now added these numbers, these years that we had before, say 2016, 1987, then of course it works the exact same way. So the big difference between the spread operator and the rest parameters is actually the place in which we use each of them. So the spread operator is used in the function call, while the rest operator is used in the function declaration to accept an arbitrary number of parameters. So I hope that the difference between the spread operator and rest parameters is now crystal clear to you. So if it is, then let's take this one step further and make the rest parameters even more useful, okay? So what I'm going to do now is to comment out this code and copy it, because we're going to do some changes here. So let me just copy this and put it back here. Because now what we want to change is to accept another parameter which will act as the age limit. So instead of having the 18 here, we will pass a parameter which is going to tell us at which age a person becomes full of age. So imagine it would be 21 in some countries, then we would need the 21 here. So we simply add a limit, and now we need to add a parameter in here because it's only one parameter. And it's one that we really know that we need. So we need one and only one limit here. Now the problem is that this limit here will also be part of the argument, right? So imagine that we now call this function with, let's say, 21 here as the limit. Then this will obviously also be part of the argument's keyword, which is not what we want, of course, because here in this argument and in this array, we actually only want the years. And how would we do that here in ES5? It's actually pretty simple, because this slice method here can help us with that. Because remember, what the slice method here does is to allow us to cut a piece of an array. So if we now simply add the number 1, what this means is that it's going to start cutting at position number 1, or basically it will start to copy a part of the array. Or in other words, at position 1 it will start to, let's say, to copy our array. And so like this we can exclude the first argument. So to make this more clear, let's again take a look at the arguments, and then let's console log also the arguments array. Okay, so we have 21, 1990, 1999, and 1965, which are all of the arguments that we pass. And then our arguments array is the same thing but without the 21. And that's because we only started copying at position number 1. So in here, so 1, 2, and 3. So that's what the slice function does. And so we can handle, let's say, a usual parameter plus a number of arbitrary parameters, which are in case these 3. Then all we have to do is to here change it to limit, and we're good to go. So now we don't need this console.log anymore. And so here we have true, false, true, such as we had before. But now suppose that the age limit would be 16, then all of them would be of full age. So we had 3 times true. So you see, adding an argument here to our ES5 function makes it even more complicated. But in ES6, it's nothing like that. All we have to do is to add the limit, and then here we have our rest parameters. So this makes it very clear and very easy to use, because there's nothing we have to change. So all we have to do, of course, is to change this to a limit, and now we're good to go. And we could add as many parameters here as we wanted, and then say with this part here that here we have an undetermined number of arguments. So if we now add 16 here and get rid of this, then we have true, 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 false, true. So it's different than before, and of course it works. So as you see by now, many of the features of ES6 simply allow us to do things that we can already do in ES5, but in a much better, quicker, and easier way. And this is, of course, one of these new features that doesn't allow us to do anything really new, but simply allows us to do something in a better way. Alright, so let's now quickly move on to the second lecture about parameters, which is default parameters.